All right. We're here with this week's live language choices during de-escalation. And we'll just wait a moment for folks to come in. Great to see you here, Jess. I'm doing this on my phone as I wait for the ferry, so I won't be able to engage many people on the chat as conveniently as I can in the home studio. Chris, good to see you. Great to hear you, or great to see you here. We'll just give it another moment, and then I'll get started. I've been thinking pretty deeply about this within the last hour. Hope everybody's well. It's kind of overcast here in the Pacific Northwest, and behind me is the great Puget Sound. And I'll be taking a ferry across shortly and going to Chehalis, Washington, where I'll be meeting with Mike DeLay, who's a formative member of Jumpstart, known each other for many years prior to that. Just a terrific thinker, clinician, and thought-provoking educator and leader in the crisis de-escalation space. Great to see people coming in. I'm just going to dive right in. So our marketing partner, Brenda, is so good at selecting inspiring topics each week based on things that she encounters during her work in the social platforms. And this week's topic originally began with word choices during de-escalation. Hey, Candace, good to see you. And I thought about that for a few moments, and I said to Brenda, let's change the title to language choices. Because I have some thoughts about that word choices don't particularly address. When we think of a language, it's an entire system of communication. It's not only the characters that are used to form words and sentences, but it's the arrangements of those words based on a number of factors. Cultural timeliness, trend. Language is always changing and evolving. While at the foundational level, someone from 100 years ago could probably interpret a great deal of the English language today, there would be a number of expressions and words and combinations of words that someone from 100 years ago, if they got in a time machine and came forward, they would probably be confused. So I think when we consider how do we best language ourselves when we have a responsibility to de-escalate, that means more than using the right word. It speaks to a deeper responsibility to organize words and phrases in a way that are de-escalatory in nature, that diffuse tension, that assist someone in experiencing you as a source of support rather than a source of control. So let's talk for a moment about language choices. Those of us who are in the education space around crisis de-escalation, or in direct service of human beings who need de-escalation services, we have a tall responsibility. We have to be able to navigate the vast spectrum of people and literacy and cultural background and any other a number of factors that speak to how someone encodes and understands others communicating with them in the world. When you add layers of complexity to that, like serious mental illness, living with autistic experience, possibly having disabilities like deafness or blindness, and different filters through which one experiences the world, the way we can adapt language becomes So incredibly important. And I'll share with you in complete transparency something I'm navigating today. One of the things that we do at Jumpstart in the housing space is that when there are people who are beneficiaries of Section 8 housing vouchers, there are some conditions on which the voucher can be enjoyed. And if those conditions are violated, the property manager or the provider has to organize the departure of the resident. Very often, this is not received well by the resident, and they can engage in a lot of animated, scary behavior to staff, where the way things are today, people being angry has been relatively normalized. Law enforcement does not respond to everyone in the world who presents angry. And workforces are now in pursuit of de-escalation training because they can't turf these interactions and events and problems with people to someone else. They have to deal with them. Sometimes, even with trained people, when they're not dealing with people who are animated and aggressive regularly, this can become an unpleasant work experience. So sometimes they will call people in to deal with the person who's highly volatile. And one of the things that we do at Jumpstart is that we will respond to agencies calling for assistance who are having to deal with particularly angry or violent people in a residential setting. And we have to carry some kind of a message about a change state, like you're about to be served or have been served notices to vacate the property. There's been a determination that you have violated the lease, and we'd like to reduce a long, protracted, potentially piece of litigation. Let's explore a cash for keys arrangement. When we engage people under these conditions, they flat don't want us around. We have to deal with a lot of anger and hostility directed at the agency, which we are emissaries for in trying to facilitate these exits. I'm dealing with someone now who is particularly hostile, and the way that I have been navigating my relationship with this person has required me to constantly reappraise the language choices I make because of the way in which this person engages the world, which changes very rapidly. This person can present from collegial to hostile and back to collegial and back to hostile very, very quickly. And while we're trying to navigate very complex situations or agreements, this can make the negotiation particularly challenging. In crisis de-escalation, we do not need to become a doormat or abdicate the responsibility to set boundaries to attend to our well-being when others become hostile. But we want to language that in a way where the boundary is set without being offensive, without being antagonistic. And if someone is deliberately attempting to evoke out of you a reaction, a mode of behavior that by its very design is maladaptive or destructive, this can be particularly challenging. The responder has a duty to not just become good at use of the language, but good at adapting the affect and the emotional state that the language requires. Let me be more specific. This particular person I'm dealing with now likes to routinely assail everyone else's intelligence and project that they are the most intelligent. If there are occasions where I agree to that mode of interaction and defer to the person's intelligence, I, in response, am provided feedback from that person that I'm losing the ability to influence them. And they will just set the discourse and the conversation, but that's not negotiation. I can't do that. I can't just let this person set the discourse because I'm there with an agenda. So I have to push back a little bit when this person begins to try to flex their intellectual prowess with me. If I go too far to show that in a moment, look, I'm your equal here, and we need to navigate the complexities of this arrangement. So if I begin to say or use language that causes this person at any moment to feel inferior or judged or valued, then I'm going the wrong way again. So I am finding myself really undertaking an extraordinary amount of effort to find a balance with someone who is presenting an extraordinary amount of volatility in the moment. And it's requiring me to explore and be willing to project a number of different personas that I have available to me in my pocket. I come from a New York cultural context. I grew up around a lot of tough guys. And the tough guys that I grew up around are people who are not flexors in their toughness, but they just kind of embody it and project it, and they're not ashamed of it. There are times that I have to language myself in a way where this person has that image of me. Then there are times if the person is not responsive to that and feels offended, I have to reel that in and attempt to be a little more nurturing in my language choices, in the way in which I express my thoughts. This is much deeper than word choices. This is about adaptability. It's starting to rain and I have no cover, so we'll do this as long as I can. These are much deeper choices than word choices, which is why I asked Brenda to change the title of this. So what are some of the takeaways associated with this topic? I think it's a worthwhile exploration for people to, not just in a simple sense, understand what triggers them, but to get to know why they have arrived at the way that they engage the world. I heard today in my therapy session, as I was describing some thoughts I was having, my therapist actually said to me, Andy, I see that you're really committed to this idea. So he validated me. And then he went on to say, I'd like to give you some feedback about what your commitment to this idea looks like. It's intimidating. It's blustery. Your facial expressions and the way in which, hey, Tim, yes, exactly, brother, words matter and are received differently. The way in which you are animating yourself to articulate this idea is kind of intimidating. If I were hearing you the way you're talking to me now, I would feel like I need to defend myself. And I'm saying, Jesus, Dave, I'm not trying to do that. He says, I know you're not trying to do it. I'm letting you know this is what it feels like. And it's perfectly reasonable for me to think that if I were having to experience this personally, for real, I wouldn't like it. And this is not the first time I have heard that about me. It reminds me very often. Years ago, a friend of mine, Lev Pulio, and I did the Snakes in the Garden podcast, and it was based on the anecdote from the garden where Miyamoto and his friend were sitting meditation in the garden. A snake comes by. Maybe some of you have heard this story before or heard me talk about it. Snake comes by, crawls over his friend as if he's not there, not even paying attention to him. Hey, Rob, Bob, good to see you, man. Then the snake makes it to Miyamoto, looks up at Miyamoto. Miyamoto looks down at the snake like, what are you doing? Snake gets scared and takes off. And Miyamoto looks at his friend and says, did you just see that? He said, yeah. And Miyamoto said, how the hell does the snake go over you and not do anything and then comes over to me and then runs? If I don't fix this, I'm never going to have a relationship with anybody, because Miyamoto did not want the snake to be scared. So I think to a degree, many people are not completely aware of how they language themselves in the world in more than the verbal sense? What is the complete totality of how you're communicating, languaging yourself, the degree to which you're emphasizing certain phrases, inputting one's bias, etc.? I think to get better at adapting, languaging in crisis de-escalation requires that we get better at understanding why we animate ourselves in the world the way that we do. My teaching style has been heavily influenced by a very deep thinker who came from the urban setting, Newark, New Jersey, who was a world-class bow hunter. He was the master coach to the Olympic coaches of 4 countries in archery, and I worked for him for a long time. He was adjunct faculty at a college, and he spoke in a non-sophisticated way. Like if you were shooting arrows into a bale and the arrows were getting buried up to the fletching, he would look at you like you were an idiot and say, put that somewhere where that don't happen. Like he had a facility to boil things down to their essential in seconds. And I loved that quality of him. And there are other things I picked up from him that I think at times do not serve me. And it can be in my desire to be understood, I can animate myself energetically in such a way that it can be off-putting. And that's what my therapist was telling me today. So languaging during crisis de-escalation, language choices during crisis de-escalation, it means a lot more than the words. It means how you are animating yourself in front of another human being in your attempt to be understood. When the real need during crisis de-escalation is, of course, to understand somebody first. I mean, that's as old as St. Francis, who articulated it, that I might understand rather than be understood. Paul wrote it in 1 Corinthians, that I become all things to all people, that I might by all means save some. To get good at adapting language means a lot more than adapting the English language. It's the language of how you engage the world and how you animate yourself in the world, how I animate myself in the world. And that's my rant today as I stand in the rain with all of you, my friends, discussing language choices during crisis de-escalation. Means a lot more than the vocabulary that you choose. Appreciate you, Tim. Thank you. Thank you so much for coming. Thank you all for coming. I think we're at about time. Yeah, we're at about 20 minutes. I'll take it. The ferry just docked, and I'll be heading down south to go see Mike Delay. All the very best to all of you. Let me quickly click on the participants here. Oh, great. Jessica, Candace, Bob Graham, Tim, Lori, and Chris. All the very best to you, friends, and we'll see you soon next week. Take good care.